Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the second installment of the Center for the Study of the Arab and Muslim World's Witnessing Genocide in Palestine film series for 2024. Today, in our second installment, we're going to be viewing the film 1948, Creation and Catastrophe, and we are joined by my dear colleague and the film director, Dr. Ahlam Mutaseb, who will say a few words about the film, provide our land statement, and then we will go ahead and roll the film. The film will be followed by Q&A, so please, if you have questions, you can enter them into the Q&A, and we will take them sequentially after we watch the film. So I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Ahlam Mutaseb.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yagobian, and welcome everyone. Unfortunately, we are still meeting during a full-fledged genocide happening against our people in Gaza and now in Lebanon as well. And so it's not really easy to be with you in space, but we try to do our part, at least to educate about what is happening. And it would be impossible actually to understand what is happening today without understanding the history of the so-called conflict or the main conflict in the Middle East. To understand the systematic process of ethnic expulsion against Palestinians since 1948, actually since 1947, to be more accurate, that is still happening today. And just to understand that what is happening in Gaza, all the ethnic expulsion is just a continuation of that genocide that started in 1947. The film actually focuses on the year 1948 because it shows this systematic expulsion and how it was actually implemented by military force, the role of the British colonizing forces as well, and how this helps us understand the so-called conflict today. I would like to, before we start rolling the film, to acknowledge also that we are all congregating on indigenous, unceded, colonized lands on Turtle Islands. And I don't want this acknowledgement to be just a performative action like now they do in a lot of the meetings. I want us to reflect on our role as being colonizers, all of us now on Turtle Island. I join you today from the indigenous unceded colonized lands of the Comiai First Nation in San Diego. And please reflect on which land you are occupying at the moment. And having said that, we will start the documentary and then we will come back for the discussion afterwards. So please feel free to leave your questions in the Q&A feature on the webinar, and we will address those when we come back. Thank you.
There are no signs for them. You won't see them on tourist maps.
Need to unmute myself. Okay, we're back, and hopefully we can take some questions from the audience. We have a pretty good number of people that are still with us and watching. So, and I believe we might be joined by Andy Trimlett, who was the co-director with Professor Mutaseb. But so just to start off with a general question, waiting for questions to appear in the Q&A, which is where anyone who has a question can submit it. I would pose this question to either, and hello Andy, welcome, either Ahlam or Andy, just sort of two interrelated questions. First, what was the original motivation for your making of the film? And since its release in 2017, and especially over the last year, how do you see its ongoing relevance and importance?
Do you want to start? So the first part was can you repeat the first part? I was more
just your initial motivations for making the film, at the time, and having been released in 2017 now, it's been out for 7 years, and yet it's still being shown globally. And so, if you could just speak to the continuing relevance and importance of the film, especially over the last year.
Yeah. Well, the reason we wanted to do the film, I mean, to make a long story short of how we met and how we started cooperating, it was actually, for me, I was working on a different project. I was working in the refugee camps, trying actually to do research like ethnographic, naturalistic research, and focusing on the role of narratives of Nakba or diaspora among Palestinian refugees intergenerationally in like creating collective identity, and how collective trauma also impact that. But when I met Andy, he convinced me actually to change the focus and do this kind of film, which focuses on 1948, because he had a compelling story. So if you can, Andy, take it from here, and then I could go back and talk a little bit about why it's still being shown now, actually across the world, basically, and its significance.
Yeah, sure thing. And thanks for having us. So I graduated from the University of Washington with a master's in Middle East Studies, and both in my undergrad and my grad work, I obviously studied the Israeli-Palestinian conflict a lot. But quite frankly, even after I graduated, I still couldn't like wrap my head around why it was continuing, like why we couldn't figure out a solution for this. And it wasn't until after I graduated and I started reading about the year 1948 that everything really started to click for me. Once I understood what happened then, all of a sudden, what was going on at the time and, in a much larger degree is going on now, started to make sense. And I realized that if I had gone through an entire graduate program without being able to make sense of this, like how is an average person sitting around watching CNN or Fox News or any of these places ever going to make sense of what's happening there? And so it was like, someone has to tell this story. Someone has to make a documentary. And no one else raised their hand. So we ended up doing it. And, I thought, I was like, I said to myself, this is the biggest project you've ever been involved in. You're not going to be done until like, late next year. And I was off by about 9 years. So it was a massive project. We ended up doing 90 interviews in 7 different countries, 3 different languages. We went over about 20,000 pages of research, and we collected over 2,000 archival images and images of military documents, et cetera, and archival film clips, and picked kind of the stuff that most well captured the story and the history that we had read to put in that hour and 26 minutes you just watched.
Yeah, and as you can tell, to understand the genocide happening today, to understand why we have Gaza, where did all these refugees in Gaza come from? Why do they live in such conditions? Why do we have conflict even now with Lebanon, the genocide extending? You need to actually understand the historical roots. Without understanding the historical roots, people are lost. Usually in the United States, people think this is, I still hear it on the media all the time, thousands of years conflict, which is not true. It's a contemporary conflict, actually a recent one. Or people saying, oh, it's just, Muslims and Jews hating each other. And that's absolutely not true. Palestinian society had all 3 monotheistic religions living in harmonious coexistence. So it dispels also a lot of these myths that are created in the United States to actually prevent people from intellectually engaging with what is happening and asking questions about how their own tax money is basically enabling the genocide, enabling, the injustice to continue for Palestinians. And of course, now after October 7 and the genocide still happening for the 2nd year, we found that people more and more than ever before, more than any other time during those 7 years, wanting to show and screen the film. And some institutions like, CSUSB had actually screened it several times already, and they still ask to screen it again and again.
Thank you very much. And we have one comment and question that has been provided. I'll go ahead and read that. It seems like this situation is equal to, if not worse than the Holocaust, especially because this has been dragging on for so long without any type of resolution or punishment or even negotiation. Again, please excuse my ignorance, but it seems that this is such a huge issue and very, very few people know about it or the severity of it, but everyone knows about the Holocaust, which is absolutely absurd considering this is still happening during our lifetimes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm not a huge fan of comparing tragedies and saying one is worse than the other. The Holocaust was absolutely horrific. What is going on now is also absolutely horrific, and we're witnessing a genocide before our eyes. And it did not start on October 7th. It's as you just saw, it started a long time ago, but certainly not thousands of years ago. Zionism is a movement that began in the late 1800s, and it was supported by the British government and is now supported by the American government. And I think as far as, why people don't know about it, there's a lot that goes into that. Really, we made this documentary because people don't know about it, because it's not talked about in America. And we think it's critical to understand this in order to understand what's happening today. I mean, today, really, what's going on literally right now is a continuation of what happened in 1948. And it's worse than what happened in 1948. There are now more refugees by far that have, more people have been pushed out of their homes by far in the last year than were pushed out in all the years since this began, since the early 1900s combined. And there are certainly more people dead now. And really what it comes down to is, there are so many people that will say, oh, it's complicated. And if you ever hear people say that word, you need to tell them it's not. This is not a complicated issue. There are a lot of details to it because it's been going on for a very long time. But the core of it is it's one group of people pushing another group of people off their land and taking their land. That's it. That's everything that's been going on for decades. And it's going on to a much more extreme level right now than it ever has before. And there are a lot of reasons why you don't, you probably haven't heard this history before. There's a very strong pro-Israel lobby in America that has a lot of sway. Also, Christian Zionism is massive in America. And one thing I've been reading about lately is, Christian Zionism actually predates Jewish Zionism. So the reason that the British government actually got involved in supporting Zionism originally was because so many of the people in charge grew up on this idea that we need to, bring people back to, the Jewish people to Palestine. It's not even so much because it was a great strategic, asset, because it wasn't. There are British reports that show it wasn't a major strategic asset. But there are people like David Lloyd George, who was the prime minister when Balfour was, made the declaration. And when people started telling him about the geography of Palestine, in his current day, he would go start listing off all the villages that he knew when he studied the map of Palestine when he was a kid. And a lot of those places didn't exist anymore. But he was so enthralled by this notion of this glorious past and restoring this glorious past that it ignored all the realities on the ground. And really that's happening today as well, with the Christian Zionism movement, which is, incredibly powerful in America. It's not the only thing that's pushing this, but it's one of the strong ones.
I want to comment quickly on whose histories are narrated. So in the United States, like so we talk about the Holocaust, and I totally agree with Andy that we shouldn't compare, tragedies, or it's not a marathon about tragedies. But we definitely could comment on the fact that some tragedies are narrated and some are not, or some, genocides are narrated and some are not. For example, if we look at the Holocaust, so I have a Mexican American friend, a Latina friend who teaches in my department, and she told me, Ahlam, I grew up in, in the American school system, and I studied everything about the Holocaust. I've seen so many movies. Every year they would show us movies, and knew all the details, all the numbers, but nobody ever talked about the Holocaust or, like the genocide against our people, right? Especially that she's also indigenous. Nobody taught me the same amount of information about the genocide that happened against Native Americans in the Americas or in Turtle Islands. Or when I teach, in my grad class, we take a decolonial approach in my qualitative research methods class. And when I speak about, do you know anything about Congo and the genocide in Congo at the hands of, the King of Belgium and his government and his arsenals, and nobody even thinks about it. And I say, like, how does the number 11 million people killed, in brutal ways, in horrifying ways? I mean, with machetes, with sometimes wide, weapons, or sometimes shots, hanged. And students are shocked, like they know nothing. They've never heard of what happened to Congolese because of the rubber industry. They don't even think about the symbolism of the cut hands, right, and limbs. When I show them pictures of Congolese children with their hands cut off, they were like, why we don't know anything about it? When I tell them, when Churchill was fighting, the bad guys was fighting the Nazis, he was actually actively killing 2 million or more Indians of starvation. Like the British were fighting the Nazis, but at the same time, they were starving Indians who were under their colonial control. So I think it's very important that we talk about this. This is why the genocide, the constant genocide against Palestinians since 1948 is something that people don't know. And they are shocked usually when they see this film or when we talk about it with those numbers and those facts. Thank you, to give us the chance to think about this out loud.
And related to both of your responses, Herman and Chomsky in Manufacturing Consent provide a framework for understanding this, and it is the framework of the worthy and unworthy victims. And they have several case studies that explain how the U.S. media, how the political establishment will focus on certain victims because they are expedient to advance American foreign policy and imperialism. And those that are deemed unworthy are simply ignored. And so I think you both spoke very eloquently regarding that point. As a historian and someone who has viewed the film many, many times, every time I see it, I'm both sort of stunned and thankful that of the timing of your interviews. And what I was wondering is related to Andy's comment about the 9 years that it took. So basically a decade. I was just wondering in terms of the critical importance of your having gathered and documented this powerful oral testimony. And I'm guessing certainly now, 7 years after its release, there are probably very few interviewees who are still alive, but I was wondering if even by the time you had finished the film and it was released, if you had already succeeded in documenting the testimony of individuals who had by that point passed away.
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, a lot of the people in the documentary passed away, and many of them some of them just months after we interviewed them. So, we talked a lot about while we were making the documentary. We told people, this really is our last chance to get these stories, and it was true. There were people like while we were making the documentary, for example, there was when we did the first interview about Deir Yassin, and we interviewed a Palestinian about it, and as you saw, it's an incredibly heart-wrenching, horrifying story. And we thought we have to have an Israeli to talk about this story as well. And so I put together a list of 3 Israelis who I knew were alive, and I knew had been there from history books I'd read. And the very first one that we reached out to said he was too sick and couldn't make it, and it was like a couple months later he passed away. So like as we were making the documentary, this was going on. So I think it's so important to get these firsthand stories, because you can get details that you could never get from a second or third generation, or just reading history books. So that's why we have taken the interviews, a number of them we've already posted online in full. So you can watch them there if you want to learn more about those, because we think it's a record for history.
That's excellent. I was unaware of that, so thank you, Andy, for letting us all know. Dr. Mutasib?
Yeah, I just want to say that actually most of the people we interviewed in all the places we were in passed away. So we only have a few survivors. In 2013, I had to hire someone from Lebanon, a young guy, to collect signatures for the interviews and to give DVDs of the interviews to whoever's still alive or their families. And he reported that at that time in 2013, many of them had died at that time. So I can imagine now that the majority of them actually had died by now.
Well, I teach an annual course on the Arab-Israeli conflict, History 4850. It'll be offered next term. And the film is really a central part of that course. And having taught it for almost 20 years before the release of the film, I'm indebted to you both for the creation of the film, and also for your responses today and for your presence today. I don't see any more questions, and so if you don't have any additional comments, I think we'll call that a wrap for this second installment of the Witnessing Genocide in Palestine film series, and thank everyone for attending and for your participation.
Maybe just announce our next film screening, if you don't mind.
The next film screening will be next Tuesday at noon, and it is Nayla and the Uprising. And
Nayla and the Uprising.
Nayla and the Uprising, pardon me. And it will be myself, Dr. Mutasib, who has direct experiential knowledge related to the first Palestinian Intifada, which is what the film focuses on. So hope to see you next week for our third installment of the series.
Thank you so much. And I just want to point out one more thing. In October of last year, we posted the documentary in full on YouTube so that anyone can watch it now without any barriers. So I just put a link in there. If you would like to share it with friends and family, etc., we would greatly appreciate it. We're over 500,000 views now, I'm very excited to say. So it's getting out there, and any help you could provide in that would be appreciated.
Thank you. And I'll just mention all of the films that we're showing in this film series, all 8. The links will be provided with the recording of our commentary and our introductions, but everyone will be able to share those links. If you found the films interesting, important, powerful, relevant, please do share the links with friends and family and colleagues.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
Goodbye, everyone.